The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, welcome aboard, family. It's good to have you with us again on another episode of this podcast, Walking Through the Language of the Heart. Listen, from 1944 to 1970, there were a great deal articles written by co-founder Bill W. For the Grapevine, which is more commonly known as AA's Meeting in Print by some. And our good friend Chris S., who has been, we were talking off the air about how long we've been doing podcasts together and doing this, bringing this stuff to you. He is with me on the line, as well as our special guest from last week. She's joining us again this week, Judy L., who has been actively involved in service to great depths within the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And all three of us sitting here ready to hopefully do something that will not only entertain you, but educate you as well and enhance your program. Welcome aboard, Chris. Hi, Judy. Judy, how you doing?
I'm swell. Thank you so much for asking. I am swell. Just waiting for the rain to happen out where I'm at.
Yeah.
And got my tomatoes covered and ready for some AA.
There you go.
To be here.
Chris, you got your tomatoes covered?
I can't grow anything. If I'm in charge of it, it's not going to last long.
That's funny. That's funny. All right. Well, Chris, last week we kind of cut our teeth on how AA's World Services grew, part 2. So this is part 2 continued. And where did we leave off?
We left off on page 153, almost down at the bottom. Now, we didn't get very far into the article, and there's good reason for that.
Sure.
There was really, really great discussion, very deep and interesting discussion into this, and I enjoyed last week's show a lot. So what we've talked about before the meeting is I'm going to read a paragraph or two, and we're gonna discuss what we're reading. Monty and I do not read any of this stuff before we do the show. Judy, we want to be as surprised as anybody else was with this stuff, okay? That's just what we kind of decided to do when we started this. So you're probably much more informed than we are. But anyway, I'm going to start reading. Bill says, the year 1944 unfolded another development of immense value. Down in Greenwich Village, probably in an attic, a few literary news-minded AAs began to issue a monthly publication. They called it the Grapevine. It was by no means the first local AA bulletin or magazine, but from the start, it was such a fine job that it caught on nationally. After a time, it became the mirror of AA thought and action countrywide. It was a magic carpet on which all of us could travel from one distant AA outpost to another. It became a wonderful exchange of our current thought and experience. But the Grapevine founders, after a while, discovered that they had a bear by the tail. It was always fun to get in the material and edit the pieces, but licking all those postage stamps and mailing thousands of copies became impossible for them. So the Grapevine came to the foundation and asked that we take over. The trustees inquired of the groups if they would like to make the Grapevine their national magazine. The answer came back an emphatic yes. Forthwith, the journal was incorporated as the AA Grapevine Incorporated. 2 foundation trustees were then seated on its 5-man board along with the editors. Funds from the foundation reserve took up a mounting deficit, of course. The necessary special workers were hired, but the editors and their successors have continued to serve as volunteers without pay to this day. In 10 years, the subscriptions coming from all over the world jumped to 30,000. In this fashion, still another headquarters world service was born and has grown. That's interesting, the first few years of the Grapevine. Judy, didn't you serve on the Grapevine?
I did. I served on the Grapevine committee, and it's changed a bit since then. One of the things that happened when we were there was they were in the middle of changing the masthead and doing major changes with the magazine, I believe, with the intention unstated that they wanted to make it more of a mainstream magazine that one could put in dentist office and perhaps use as an outreach rather than a meeting in print. I presume that was the reason for taking some of the most AA connected verbiage off of the front of it.
That's interesting.
They wanted very much to have permission to do that. They did not have that permission at the time, but they were preparing for the conference that would come along that would give them that permission, and which they eventually achieved.
Was there a reason why it was affectionately known as the meeting in print? Because when I read it, of course I'm a youngster really when it comes to this fellowship, but when I started reading the Grapevine articles that were sitting in the slots there in my own group, I didn't see it as a meeting. I saw it as a magazine.
Well, I believe that the reason they called it our meeting is in print is because just like a person's share, you'd have a small, it's as though you had a meeting where you were allowed 3 minutes to speak. And so they would gather 3 minutes or so of someone's story they had written.
Gotcha.
For those people that were not hearing those voices because they weren't geographically located there.
Sure. Okay. Did the jokes page, the comedy part, did that show up later, or was that in the beginning?
They've always tried to have that in there, and the cartoonist died.
Oh,
who used to do so many of those cartoons. Took
Right.
them a while to get somebody else in there.
Yeah. Wow.
So I sponsored one of the Grapevine editors living near New York City. I had, you're close to the general service there, the main office, and he met somebody very far up the chain in general service.
Down the chain.
Down the chain. They certainly want you to believe that. Yeah. But anyway, so somebody down the chain who ended up running AA later on. But basically what the guy said is, hey, you're an editor. You edit. You're working for Harcourt Brace Jovanovich or something, right? Why don't you come help me edit the Grapevine? So he did, and for years he was one of the editors, and so the editors of the Grapevine would be given tickets to the General Service Conference. That's the annual event where they fly everybody in. Judy, have you ever been to that?
Of course.
I got a chance to go because he took me as his guest, and that was really fun. I got to hear Smitty, Bob Smith Jr. that year. This is 20 years ago, probably.
Yeah.
But it was it was interesting. He would tell stories about the Grapevine and some of the troubles it had at that period of time. It was struggling. It needed more subscribers than it had.
Then now they have less, but I think there's always been a sense that in trying to keep it separate, because Bill saw it as a separate corporation.
Yes.
Probably because he thought, being Bill, if AA fails, I'll snug it back into Grapevine and start over again, because he gave Grapevine enormous separate independent powers. My guess is, being Bill, he provided himself a back door. That's my thought. And
that's interesting.
Bill was not one to have, he's a planner and a visionary.
He was a farseer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they started this thing, finding a way, as always, and I think this is the thing we miss a lot on the street level and on every level besides, is that communication is what the Grapevine is our excellent possibility for. There's been a couple of things we fight about. We fight about what used to be called the gray pages.
Yep.
Now it's called About AA, or about something to do with alcoholism. And a lot of people feel strongly that in a magazine that is a meeting for print, you shouldn't have that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
And other people feel as though it makes it more entertaining. So it's a battle that every couple of years somebody sends in an agenda item that says, take it out. And then 3 years later, somebody will send in a bunch of stuff that says, put it in.
That's been going on forever. Yeah.
It has been going on forever. And people feel passionate about that.
It's part of who we are as a fellowship.
We got to argue about something.
That's right.
So Bill wanted communication. Maybe that's what it looks like for us.
All right.
So as early as 1945, mediating and giving suggestions by mail for the solution of group problems had put a tremendous volume of work on headquarters. With most of the metropolitan AA centers, correspondence files had grown 6 inches thick. Seemingly every contestant in every group argument at every point of the compass wrote us in this period. It was chiefly from this correspondence and from our mounting public relations activity that the basic ideas for the tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous came. In late 1945, a good AA friend suggested all this massive experience might be codified into a set of general principles. Principles simply stated, which could offer tested solutions to all of AA's problems of living and working together and of relating our societies to the world outside. If we had become sure enough of where we stood on such matters as membership, group autonomy, singleness of purpose, non-endorsement of other enterprises, professionalism, public controversy, and anonymity in its several aspects, then such a code of principles could be written. Such a traditional code could not, of course, ever become rule or law, but it could act as a sure guide for our trustees. Headquarters people, and most especially for AA groups with bad growing pains. Being at the center of things, we of the headquarters would have to do the job. Aided by my helpers there, I set to work. The traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, which resulted, were first published in the so-called long form in the AA Grapevine of April 1946. Then I wrote some more pieces explaining the tradition in detail. These came out in later issues of the Grapevine, and Monty and I have read all of these in previous shows. Meanwhile, at the foundation, we had taken another significant action that was forthwith embedded in these traditions. In 1945, we had written Mr. Rockefeller and the 1940 dinner guests that we would no longer need their financial help. Book royalties would look after Dr. Bob and me. Group contributions would pay the general service expenses. Since that day, when we declared for self-support, the AA headquarters has steadily refused outside contributions. The first reception of the traditions was interesting and amusing. The reaction was mixed, to say the least. Only groups in dire trouble took them seriously. From some quarters, there was violent reaction, especially from groups that had long lists of protective rules and regulations. There was much apathetic indifference. Several of our intellectual members cried loudly that the traditions reflected nothing more than the sum of my own hopes and fears for Alcoholics Anonymous. Therefore, I began to travel and talk a lot about the new traditions. People were at first politely attentive, though it must be confessed that some did go to sleep during my early harangues. After a while, I got letters containing sentiments like this: Bill, we'd love to have you come and speak. Do tell us where you used to hide your bottles and all about that big hot flash spiritual experience of yours. But for heaven's sake, please don't talk any more about those damned traditions.
I love Bill's tone of voice in that. Here he is, Mr. Big Shot, and they say, don't talk about that.
Right.
And they used to say, Bill, tell the bedtime story. They called his story the bedtime story because people would nod out.
So the piece that stood out to me here was such a traditional code could not, of course, ever become rule or law.
Yeah. And that all the traditional, all the 12 traditions are sacrificial in nature.
Interesting.
They are all sacrificial in nature. And what do we fight against the most? You know, if selfishness and self-centeredness is at the root of the problem, the traditions would be really hard because each one of them, and I'm a strong proponent of traditions in all aspects of things, and that without them, I want to just go on record and say, without them, AA will die.
So I kind of look, and this may just be something that's in my brain, but I've always looked at my first sponsor told me, because I became a tradition Nazi really early. I was very, I transferred my self-centeredness and self-righteousness right into my fellowship. And by God, this place is going to do it and do it right. And, you're going to fail if you don't. You got to listen to me and all this stuff. And my sponsor very gently whispered in my ear one day, he said, the traditions ought never be broken, but they must be flexible. I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, they're written in Jello, Monty. Jello. And I'm like, no, that's just not right. And what I saw, and I think it was just one of those things that you just kind of, a light bulb goes on in your head. It's kind of like under the 10 Commandments, right? It's like, I can't follow these perfectly, but they're there to show me that I can't. They're there to show me my need. And the traditions in Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, are there not only to protect the fellowship, but to show us our need for them. Not our need to argue about them. Does that make any sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's just kind of my take on it.
Bill saw a lot. Remember, he's getting 1 million letters into New York from all these groups. And so he's paying attention to what the groups are doing, what's working, what's not working.
Yeah.
So there's an enormous amount of experience that he's gaining that people like us would just never have. I mean, we don't pay attention to 8,000 groups, and Bill in the central office was. So, I see him as best practices that if you it's not sudden death if you don't follow one of them, but if there's a wholesale ignoring of these best practices and these processes that have been put in place to ensure unity, continues in a healthy manner, you're probably reducing the likelihood that your group is going to be around or your district is going to be around. You know what I mean? You're playing with fire, just like the steps with with personal recovery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you ignore the fact that there is a recovery program in front of you and you're just not interested in that, you're reducing your chances of being around next year sober.
Or if you cherry pick them.
Yeah,
We have groups that
Cafeteria
cherry pick
style.
the traditions. That cherry pick. Well, this one will apply to our group, but this one really isn't important, and that worries me for a group.
So let me give a thought into that, if you will. It's like with each one of the first step, the first concept, then the first tradition, Bill outlines the issue.
Yeah.
In the second of each of those three things, he talks about turning over to something else greater than us in power. In
True.
all of those three. Second step, powerlessness. Then the next 10 actually become all of the ways in which, in the traditions, we can make or break. So the next 10 are all the ways in which we destroy unity. And by the time you get to 12, you can't help but eventually get it that it's not anonymity that is the issue, it's humility that's the issue.
Agreed.
When what we have to fight with against is our own pride and arrogance and not wanting ever to take. So they all require that we give up something we personally value for the good of the overall organization. So if I apply that to me and my family, it's not much different.
Right.
If you have one person being selfish, putting themselves first, in all of the same ways as the 12 traditions, with no group's conscience, no consideration and voice, you're going to have the same results that you had there, where our defects are running instead of our recovery.
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. We did a series here at Take 12 Radio a long time ago with a gal named Carol Ann Preston, and it was called Applying the Traditions in Your Personal and Business Life. And it's amazing when you do that, you know, how much your small business will improve, how much your family relations will improve, particularly in the area of the self-supporting, for instance, and how your finances will improve. It's amazing stuff.
I think it's amazing. I think Tradition 7 is one of the big ways in both family and AA and the group and the conference.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not self-supporting emotionally, financially, physically, sexually, spiritually,
Mm-hmm.
it's all those ways.
Yeah.
In which I need to be self-supporting in my relationships. And I add sexually because in an intimate relationship, that's a piece of the thing.
Right.
And certainly that doesn't generally apply in AA, but maybe it does in other ways. Yeah, I think that self-support isn't just about putting $2 or $5 in the basket. I think it's about how am I self-supporting in my life and in my work life and in my relationship lives with my friends? What do I do there? And it's always overcoming my own selfishness and self-centeredness for the good of something else.
Indeed.
And that's the struggle of my life. I don't know about yours, but it certainly is the struggle of my life.
Yeah, you pretty much got me saying, yeah, me too.
Yeah, what about me?
All right.
But time presently changed all that. Only 5 years later, several thousand AA members meeting at the 1950 Cleveland Convention declared that AA's traditions, by then stated in the now familiar short form, constituted the platform upon which our fellowship could best function and hold together in unity for all time to come. They saw that the 12 traditions were going to be as necessary to the life of our society as the 12 steps were to the life of each member. The AA traditions were, the Cleveland Convention thought, the key to the unity, the function, and even the survival of us all. Of course, I realized that I had not been the actual author of the traditions. I had merely mirrored principles which had already been hammered out on thousands of anvils of AA group experience. It was clear, too, that AA's general headquarters, its trustees, and its staff had made the forging of these vital principles possible. Had there been no AA headquarters to bring our problems into focus, the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous could never have been written. By this time, AA had found still more favor in the world of medicine. Two of the great medical associations of America did an unprecedented thing. The year was 1944. The Medical Society of the State of New York invited me to read a paper at its annual meeting. Following the reading, 3 of the many presidents stood up and gave their highest endorsement. These were Dr. Harry Tebow, AA's best friend in the psychiatric profession, Dr. Kirby Collier, also a psychiatrist friend and an early advocate of AA, and Dr. Foster Kennedy, the world-renowned neurologist. The Medical Society itself then went still further. They permitted us to print my paper and the recommendations of these 3 doctors in pamphlet form. The very large numbers of these pamphlets have since been distributed all over the world, carrying the assurance to doctors everywhere that AA is medically sound. In 1949, the American Psychiatric Association did exactly the same thing. I read a paper at its annual meeting in Montreal. The paper was reprinted in the American Journal of Psychiatry, and we were permitted to put it in pamphlet form under the title, The Society of Alcoholics Anonymous. This greatly increased our standing with the psychiatric profession everywhere. These medical papers have served the foreign groups especially well, saving them the years of time that were required here in America to persuade physicians of AA's worth. While on the topic of medicine, the part headquarters played in the field of hospitalization ought to be reviewed. So you know, it's interesting how we had some really serious people in the medical community say some really good things about us back in the 50s.
Tebow, if you've ever tried to read him, was an egghead. He's hard to read, but he's intensely good.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Like Tebow talked a lot about the ego, the deflation of the ego, and how the ego can rebuild as you're headed toward a relapse. You know, he pointed out a lot of things that I think treatment centers are still kind of keeping their eye on. You know, the relapse prevention programs and things like that. You know, right. Tebow was the guy who first put his finger on that. You know, in medical language.
I always thought that he was so right, but I see it in terms of movies. So he talked about how the ego reappears every day and builds again. And I see it as, if you remember, if you've seen Harry Potter, there is a phoenix who dies every night,
yes,
and then poof, comes back the next day. And I always thought, oh, there it is. That's Tebow's ego. Loses its feathers and dies every night, and then poof, it's back again.
That's cool. As all of us know, many hospitals have been reluctant to take us in for the short periods of treatment we usually need to grant our sponsors the necessary visiting privileges and to cooperate with our area intergroup associations. You know, I want to stop right there. I mean, Bill is saying short treatment, making sure the AA sponsors come in and make a connection so that there is an aftercare program for this treatment. And I used to see this happen a lot more than I see it now. You know, how about we talk about that for a few minutes?
Yes, let's talk about that, shall we? Oh my gosh. Maybe I should shut up because I could go on forever on this, but I got to say this. So I was the Judy. I was the director of recovery education for a large faith-based treatment facility for a number of years. And my biggest bugaboo was improper exit plans. Or exit plans that were, here's a list of meetings to go to. You know, we're going to slap you on the butt, give you a certificate, have a good life. I'm like, no, wait a minute. This exit plan should have started 3 to 4 months before this. It was a year program before this guy was ever being considered, you know, and we need to make connections with him, not just give him a schedule. We need to make personal connections with him. Now, of course, this is just those of us working in that field. But as somebody who has been a member of the 12-step community, I really got fired up about it because I'd seen how people that come out of treatment that don't have a working plan, that don't have those connections, that have just gone for a few walks in a month to a meeting just to get fresh air. Oh, I could go on. You know what I'm saying? And if you don't have that exit plan in place, if you don't have that aftercare plan, you can't call a guy up who's been drinking and using for 24 years after he's been in a program and say, "Are you sober?" "Yes, sir, I'm sober." "All right, boom. See, 95% success rate." What? You're lying. It's not true. This particular organization boasts of a 96% success rate, and it's crap because it's like 3 out of 5 dentists survey recommend Crest for those who, you know, use toothpaste. Well, they only talk to 5 people, and 3 of them said, "Yeah, I use Crest." So they're not lying, but they're lying. So anyway, I'll stop there before I go on a tangent.
I want to hear Judy's tangent because she and I have talked. Yes, I do. She and I have talked about this at length.
Yeah, I have lots of opinions about it that probably are not. I have never been to treatment, for which I'm extremely grateful.
Bless your heart.
I got sober in the rooms of AA, and I took a year to figure out that AA was a we don't drink club. Even going to a meeting a day. So I'm a slow learner.
Wow.
But I want to say this. We have become bigger than AA. We have become a society which wants labels on every box. And because we want a label on every box, we think once we have a label, we have a recovery.
Ah. Yeah.
And because we are a society that looks only at the surface of things, by the time you've invested a month in eating and drinking and feeling better and falling in love with your next door sober person, by the time you come out of there, you got a glow on, you're looking good, your clothes are clean, maybe you got new teeth. I don't know. It's, you know how we are. We're a society where you get new teeth and go back to school. And eventually, it's just what we do. And by the time you're getting out of your treatment, they're saying, well, you know, maybe 6 months long term in an apartment would be a really good plan for you too. Because don't forget, you have OCD, and you'll go back to that family that enables your drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not go back there. So you go, by the time, so a couple of things happen. By the time you get to a place where you might find AA as a part of your life, your recovery is dependent on other facilities and has very little to do with AA.
That's right.
AA has become an aftercare program with no dependency, no loyalty, and no need necessarily for sponsors or steps. So that's one problem. The other is that you've now identified 5 different quirks that in my family we call quirks, but now suddenly I have some kind of mysterious personality disorder. I've been deeply depressed all of my life. I'm probably a type 2 psychopath, and certainly OCD and ADD on the side, if I'm not medicated, which I probably am. So by the time I've got all these labels, I don't have recovery, I have labels. And we've got a group speak. And we now have this other jargon, and I think AA falls into that too. how do we not speak jargon to people that are coming in? That's our responsibility. I don't need to throw words at them from AA meetings that have no significance, no substance whatsoever, and people do it all the time.
Sure.
We fling nonsensical jargon at people without thinking, without thought. And so does the recovery system. So if you're a new person coming in, you're dry as a bone, could set fire to them. You know, you're dry, and you walk into a meeting, maybe, you don't have any recovery, but you haven't been drinking. And it's a really big step from one side of that creek to the other.
Yeah.
I'm convinced, you know, the book talks about the bridge to shore. My reason and my intellect have been stimulated and entertained for the past however long. I'm standing firmly on that bridge of reason. What I need is a sponsor's hand to get to shore. And I got no sponsor. I am trusting not in God, I'm trusting in my treatment center.
That's right.
And so I think it's a really broken thing that's like taking drunks and putting them in an orphanage. And then thinking they're going to have solid connections sometimes later.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's, not that people don't need it. I think Bill, at some point I read, Bill said, yeah, he thought maybe 3 days would be good for treatment experience to get somebody medically supervised while they detox, maybe as much as a week.
Sure.
Beyond that, we have an entire industry built up on the basis of negativity, of finding out all of your former quirks and peculiarities, and giving them disease concepts, trauma concepts, and all kinds of stuff. And with AA, there's a train coming through every 3 years of a new, whatever you want to call it. Right now, where everybody's traumatized. But you know, we used to all be incested. And before that, we all had inner children problems. And before that, we all were hypoglycemic. And then we ran with wolves somewhere in there too. But everybody has all of a new book, and everybody comes in, and we get all onto it, and everybody picks up the new jargon. We start a few new groups to talk about it. And then about 3 years later, it fades just as another new book with another new angle comes in to be sold. And it's what we do. Instead of saying we got one program, it's got the biggest umbrella in the world. It says all you have to be is an alcoholic. It doesn't say you have to be a goofy anything.
Right.
It doesn't say you have to be an enemy of anything. You don't have to belong to any tribe. You don't have to belong to any political organization. You don't have to belong to any religion. And we don't care about your sexual life. Just come and get recovery in this big umbrella. And we forget that that's what we have to offer. Was that enough, Chris?
Wow, yeah.
That was excellent.
You did good, Judy.
I could go on.
I know, and I have to say, I'll just say this. I think the biggest issue with the organization I worked for is they thought they were recovery. And I kept saying, you're not recovery, you're treatment. Recovery is something totally different. And so the guys would leave, they would complete, and you're right, they had no bridge. They had no sponsor, they had nothing.
They look good, they smell good, they think they're recovered.
Right.
And we forget that our natural people are the ones who don't look good, don't smell good,
right,
are shaken a little bit, and have a very questionable history.
Yep.
Those are our fellows. I'm not opposed to anybody coming out of treatment. I just think that as the industry has grown into not just a week, 2 weeks, 28 days, but after 28 days, you go to a step down. And then after a couple of months of proving that you didn't drink and you were okay, then you go for 6 months somewhere. And I even have friends that do that as a business. And I have to say, intellectually, it all makes a lot of sense. It's a great industry now being bought up by investment bankers because it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that money will corrupt us as surely as it corrupted everything else it touched.
There you go.
Yep.
Wow.
Shut up, Judy. Shut up, Judy.
During the 1940s, two hospitals did meet all these urgent needs and afforded shining examples of how medicine and AA could cooperate. At St. Thomas Hospital in Akron, Dr. Bob, the wonderful Sister Ignatia, and the hospital staff presided over an alcoholic ward that had ministered to 5,000 alcoholics by the time Dr. Bob passed away in 1950. At New York Knickerbocker Hospital provided a ward under the care of our first friend in medicine, Dr. William Duncan Silkworth, where he was assisted by a red-headed AA nurse known as Teddy. By 1954, 10,000 alcoholics had been referred to Knickerbocker by the New York Intergroup and had passed through this ward, the majority on their road to freedom. It was in these two hospitals and by these pioneering people that the best techniques of combining medicine and AA were worked out. Since proper hospitalization was, and it still is, one of AA's greatest problems, the New York headquarters has retailed this early hospital experience along with the many subsequent developments and ramifications to groups all over the world. Still another very vital service. Meantime, too, the great tide of public approval continued to sweep in. Nothing contributed so much to this as did our friends of the press, radio, and in recent times, television. Long since, the headquarters office had subscribed to several clipping services. Magazine articles and a never-ending deluge of news stories about us continued to feed the headquarters scrapbooks. Writers asked us to check their manuscripts. Members were helped to appear anonymously on radio and TV programs. Hollywood wanted to do motion pictures. Making arrangements for public relations became more than ever a primary effort of the New York office. How many lives all this saved, how many years of misery were averted for thousands of alcoholics and their families, only God knows. About this time, a serious threat to our long-term welfare made its appearance. Usually meaning well, members began breaking their anonymity all over the place. Sometimes they wanted to use the AA name to advertise and help other causes. Others just wanted their names and pictures in the paper. Being photographed with the governor would really help AA, they thought. I'd earlier been guilty of this too. But at last we saw the appalling risk to AA if all our power drivers got loose at the public level. Already scores of them were doing it. So headquarters got to work. We wrote remonstrances, kind ones, of course, to every breaker. Then about every 2 years, we sent letters to nearly all press and radio outlets explaining why AAs shouldn't break their anonymity before the public. Nor, we added, did AA solicit money. We paid our own bills. In a few years, the public anonymity breakers were squeezed down to a handful. Thus, another valuable headquarters service had gone into action.
So a quick story. When we had one of the Olympics not too long ago, I was the person who got to write the letter for some reasons. And I got to write the letter to the newspaper that showed a picture of this Olympic gold medal winner. I think it was a gold medal winner, could have been silver. But certainly above my pay grade, talking about how his friend had recovered in AA and was such a shining example of AA to the world because of his ski ability. And this whole story was on the front page of the little town where he did his skiing. New York contacted me and said, you might want to write these folks a little letter. So we write those kinds of letters, and they go something like this. You may not be aware of AA's tradition of public anonymity. And because we try to do this, and it would greatly handicap us when we publish articles that talk about a person's recovery in the newspaper or in the whatever, in this case it was the newspaper, and we just thought that you might want to know that in the future, and that kind of thing. And the tone is really, really kind. It's really kind. It was hard for me to write it, but it was really kind. And I sent that to the newspaper, and I sent it to the writer of the article, and never heard back from either one of them. So I don't know what happened, but it was just one of those, perhaps you're not aware. So let me tell you, we don't do that. And it's back to that sense of humility and sacrifice that we're now calling, I want everybody to know I'm an alcoholic because I can do so much good. If I, as a famous person, tell the world I'm an alcoholic, or all of my circles, think of all the good it'll do for AA.
Yeah.
That's the story.
It's usually really, really bad luck to break your anonymity at that kind of level. You're almost sure to get drunk. You just are. I've seen it time and time and time again.
Yeah, the evidence is there. It's pretty clear. How many authors, celebrities, clinicians, treatment professionals have gone back out shortly after their names have appeared in media?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, the list is endless.
It certainly is, and there's some famous people whose anonymity has been broken by others. And
by others, yeah.
All speaks to our innate self-centeredness, don't you think?
I think so.
It's like we don't know what a principle is. If you ask 10 people at your home group, what's a principle? They wouldn't understand it.
So I'm reading an article today in the paper, and it's a very famous actor or actress. I would never, say who, that was on a very popular 80s, TV show. And they're taking pictures of this person drinking. And they're saying, oh, so-and-so is back drinking. After 40 experiences with treatment centers. So, there wasn't any what I would call AA break, but that gives us a black eye, without I was horrified by it. First of all, why would you put someone in 40 treatment centers? I mean, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. You know what I mean? Like after maybe the 35th experience with a treatment center, wouldn't you try something else?
So wait a minute, though. Maybe it's not about getting them sober.
Ah.
Yeah, you might be right. Maybe it's cleaning them up and getting them ready for the next photo shoot.
Hiding them out from the press. Hiding them out from a job loss. Hiding them out with whatever is available under the cloak of anonymity, so to speak. Getting a child. How many children have been put into AA detox facilities, not because they're alcoholics, but because they're problem children?
That's right. And
it's a behavioral thing, not a drink,
The organization that I worked for so long, they did have a lot of high successes, and of course they've never agreed with this. But when I looked at the people that were succeeding, you know what I found? I found alcohol abusers. I found heavy drinkers. I found people that maybe they did a few drugs and got themselves into trouble, but they weren't actually addicts and they weren't actually alcoholics. And those are the ones.
Wild childs.
Yeah, they were. And the program worked for them, right? But for the true alcoholic, the true drug addict, it failed.
Yeah. It's treating a chronic condition with an acute intervention.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like treating diabetes with a cast. It's like treating hypertension with an aspirine. It's not gonna.
It's like treating diabetes with chocolate cake is what it's like.
Yeah.
It's just it's an interesting thing because we fought about principles again because they're sacrificial in nature. If I want publicity, I want my name in print. Anonymity and the breaking of it is a great way for me to have personal publicity. But it's not a great way to build my character's humility.
Right.
And we even, says somewhere in the book that eventually we seek humility for its own sake. And when I first got here, I got to tell you, the thought of seeking humility was kind of nauseating.
Who would want to do that?
Right.
You want me to give up? You want me to surrender and then be humble?
Right. I would lose
Why?
my whole character.
Why?
Right. Right.
Oh,
So,
man.
it's kind of anti the nature of the person. You're going to have a lot of successes with drug addicts because you're going to stop them and you're going to be stopped.
Yes. That's it, though.
Same with a lot of the drinkers. You given enough reason, you can say, I'm so done with that. And you're done with that.
So our friend up in Canada, Marty, tells this great story. He's a street clinician. He's the guy. Now Canada is different. It has a different kind of medical, and medical interventions. It's got socialized medicine, and they'll go out in the streets to find the sick people. They won't wait for them to come into the hospital. And he's like the street therapist. He goes out and he gets them, and then he brings them in and he tries to work with them. And he goes, it's incredibly rare that I ever refer anybody to AA. What I'll do is I'll say, I'll ask them a series of questions. Well, every time you leave work, you stop at a bar on the way home and you get really drunk. Yeah, that's what's going on. He goes, well, have you ever tried going home a different way where you don't pass that bar? And he'll get him to try that, and it'll work. You know what I mean? It'll work. And so there are a lot of people who these crazy interventions work for.
Sure.
And
hallelujah. I mean, that's great. But who are we?
I think so.
But the flip side of the coin is we're killing people.
There's no doubt. We're unfortunately the people who, if we try not passing the bar, we'll find another one to pass. You know
That's
what
right.
I mean? And that's a whole nother ball game.
I will build one.
I've always said as well that a lot of the treatment centers claim evidence-based and outcomes on people who are not defined as alcoholics.
That's right.
By our literature.
That's right.
They wouldn't fit the mold in our literature, and
Right.
and what happens with the real alcoholic after they've gone through treatment is if they don't follow it up with a lifetime plan, with a lifetime way of life, they're just they're not going to make it.
Nope.
And it just seems to me that a lot of these treatment centers did a better job back in the day of passing people off to Alcoholics Anonymous. They would bring in the people who would sponsor them into the treatment center and ensure that the day you get out,
yes,
you're meeting with that person and you're going to a meeting. And I remember that kind of stuff happening, and I don't see it happening anymore. It's a shame.
You know why the organization that I worked for said they didn't want anybody going to AA meetings like on Saturday night, right? You know why? Because there's girls there. Somebody there is smoking. But yet they were running these thrift stores where there were girls there and people were smoking and people actually bringing drugs in, right? But they couldn't, heaven forbid, they go to an AA meeting or even a faith-based meeting like Celebrate Recovery. We mustn't go there. There's people that smoke. And it was a non-smoking facility, right? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. But that's okay. I'm not there anymore.
When I got sober, people smoked like steam locomotives.
Oh my gosh!
we had one of those smoke eaters in a little one that should have been a small bedroom, 12 by 12.
Yes.
And it seated 30 people, all of whom were smoking, and the smoke detector was going zzz, And they'd have to clean out the screen every week.
That's hilarious.
Dripping with all the stuff, you know. Oh my God. And you know, we're just we are what we are. I love our goofiness, by the way. I really do. I don't think we should even ever try to turn people into Wonder Bread.
Right.
I think we should enjoy a person and help a person become the person God would have them be, which doesn't have to look at all like me, but has to look like they've got their own journey. How can I help you to use the program to arrive at the contract between you and God?
Yeah.
Whatever that is, whatever that God looks like, whether it's a tree or a flower or a ferry on the end of a boat, I don't care. But everybody has a belief system. We generally call it God, but I don't care what that belief system is. And, it does seem to work for a whole lot of folks. Not for everybody, but for a whole lot of folks.
Yeah.
And if we don't get to that fundamental, this is the thing we've got. It's a big umbrella with one purpose. It's not to keep anybody out. It's only does among all of your craziness, is there an alcoholic in there? If you've got multiple personalities, is one of them an alcoholic? If you're schizophrenic, is one of those folks an alcoholic?
They all are.
Yeah, they are. So, we've got to just have this. I don't care what else you got. Are you an alcoholic in there too?
Yeah.
All right. So, Monty, I think it's going to take 3 weeks to get through this article.
Okay, where are we at
What
here?
do you think?
Yep, I think it will. But I love it. I'm loving it.
Me too.
This is great. So these kind of discussions, you got mac and cheese and then you got filet mignon. And I think this is the filet mignon of podcasts when we can talk like this. I love it.
Well, I love this. I know that somebody who's maybe a treatment fan may take offense at this.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm not opposed to people learning and recovering and getting well. And I need to say that what I am opposed to is not getting clear-cut help getting to a lifelong answer.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, really well said. That is a good note to land on. Listeners, if you would like to comment, depending on the podcasting platform that you're listening to, you may be able to do it there. If you're listening on YouTube audio, you certainly can comment there. And you can always email us at take12radio@comcast.net. That's TAKE, the number 12, radio@comcast.net. Love us, hate us, anything in between. We just want to hear from you. And believe me, just because we're right doesn't mean you're necessarily wrong. I just made that up. I like that. See how open-minded and sure of myself I am as well? I could use my ego and my humility there, right? Mm-hmm. What a balance.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Judy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Are you going to finish this chapter out with us next week?
If you want me to.
Chris, let's bring her back this week and finish it out.
Absolutely.
That sounds
I will
great.
be in Seattle. I'll come to you from your own time zone.
Hey, there you go. All righty. Okay, our good friend Judy L. and, of course, Chris S. and myself, we are all very grateful that you joined us. Whether you're listening to this now or 10 years from now, we've got shows that people have listened to for the first time and I'm getting emails from. That's great. You can always download them for fun and for free. This particular show, Walking Through the Language of the Heart, every episode is available on our website for fun and for free. Simply go to take12radio.com, click on the Recovery Workshops banner, and there you'll find all sorts of goodies for you to pick and choose over. All right, until our next broadcast, this is the Monty'man along with Chris S. and Judy, and we're wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof.